Okay, so this is lesson 2-1, the history of atomic theory, the atom, and the development of the atomic theory. What you're going to hear me say a lot throughout this lecture today is belief. I believe in Santa. I believe in dinosaurs. But here's the difference. Alex, do dinosaurs in their existence on this earth depend on your belief in them? No. Is the fact that I'm standing right here in front of you, is me standing here dependent on you believing I'm here? No. Here's the beautiful thing about science. Scientific fact is true, whether you choose to believe in it or not. People say, do you believe in aliens? Do you believe in the tooth fairy? Do you believe in this or that? Like, whether I believe in them is irrelevant, because if they truly do exist, they're going to exist whether I believe in them or not. Do you believe the earth is flat? Well, it isn't, but my belief doesn't matter. This isn't Tinkerbell. It's not powered on the notion of belief. So I'm gonna really highlight that today, and I hope that you guys will realize and you'll notice that there was a lot of belief going on here because they didn't have anything else to lean on. We're going back to BC, like 400 or something BC. Not a lot of science was back then. In fact, science really wasn't a thing. People would see a solar eclipse and think it was the end of the world. No, the moon is just moving in front of the sun, forming a shadow. People would see thunderclouds and think the gods are mad at them. I told you what my ancestry is. Thor is the Viking god of thunder. The Vikings seriously thought that when they saw thunderstorms rolling in, it was an omen from Thor, like what we're doing is good. Or when it got to be the wintertime and you would see the clouds of snow and ice coming over the mountains, the Vikings thought the frost giants were out to get them. Stuff like that. They didn't know where the tides went, what caused the tides. They didn't know what a germ was. They didn't know what an atom was. They didn't know where the sun came from, where it rose. They didn't know where the sun went when it set. That's why in a lot of different cultures, the sun was a god. Because, oh, thank you so much thank you for deciding to rise today and give us life and warmth and nourishment. The sun does that every day. The earth rotates. They didn't know about that. They didn't have satellites back then. They didn't have the ability to know, or the ability to circumnavigate the planet. So there's a lot of unknowns. So a lot of information long time ago was a belief. But I want you guys to consider this. Sometimes we explain what we don't know by believing this or that. But let me try to, I don't know if I did this with you guys in the first day of school, but I did with my AP Bio. Check this out. You ready? This hand represents everything there is to know about the natural world. Everything. This hand represents everything we know up to this point. What is the gap between my two hands? Everything that there is to know, everything we currently know. What is the gap? What we don't know. How would you describe the gap? Let's say that this hand is your parents. No, your grandparents. Your grandparents probably around in the 1950s, 1960s, I bet. Here's what they knew in the 60s. Here's everything that there was to know. What happened to the gap between the time your grandparents were in high school up to when your parents were in high school? Got smaller. Now, what happens to the gap between the time that your parents were in high school to the time that you are now in high school? That gap that we call unknown is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Every day, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So who knows? Maybe one day we might close the gap. But the bottom line is that we base this off evidence. We base this off data. We base this off observations and research and experimentation. You don't have to believe in something. I don't have to believe in gravity. Gravity does not exist because I believe in it. What goes up must come down. Water freezing at 0 degrees Celsius is not a belief. It is a scientific fact. And if you were to take every science book, chemistry book, biology book, geology, meteorology, climatology, astronomy, if you shredded every single book, could you get all that data back? How? You're nodding your head back there. How could you, if you shredded every science book in the world, destroyed them, could you get all that information back? Yes or no? Why not? But how did they get all that scientific information? They learned it. What else? How do they know that there's 7 continents? Like, how do they know that there's planets? How do they know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west? They observed. They did experimentation. They recorded data. They did simulations. If you destroyed every single piece of information on science, could you recreate it? You could. Let's say that I wrote a book on gravity and I publish it across the world. Here's gravity. All right, somebody destroys all my work. Could you do experiments and observations and make a new book on gravity? Yeah. Imagine I have 2 + 2 = 4. Okay. Let's just break it down real easy for you. You don't need to write this down. 2 + 2 = 4. Does 2 + 2 = 4 because I believe in it? No. 2 + 2 = 4 because 2 + 2 = 4. Now, what if someone took that and destroyed it? That means there's no more written word about 2 + 2 = 4. Could you find out later in time that 2 + 2 = 4? Yes, that's what I'm trying to tell you. The beautiful thing about scientific data and information, and the fact that you don't have to believe in it, is that it could all be destroyed and you can recreate it. If I said 3 + 3 = 6 and someone destroyed that work, well, you can later find out 3 + 3 = 6. But let me ask you this. If you tell me a story, okay, and no one writes your story down, or let me rephrase that. You tell me a story that you saw the nose goblins or that you saw UFOs, and we write that down. You're dead, but your writing survived. There's a lot of authors in that library who are dead, but we destroy all your books. Could we recreate your story? How? You're dead and all your books are destroyed. Could we? You're telling me that she's nodding her head. Yes, we can. Tell me how we can recreate your story about the nose goblins and UFOs if we destroyed all of your written work and you are deceased. Could we? If I told you a story about my vacation to Africa and you wrote my story down, and that is the only evidence of my story about my trip to Africa, and I die, and all that's left is my story that you wrote, but then you lose that book, like the book gets burned, will you ever have my story again? I'm dead. But let's say you remembered it. But you didn't write it down. You die. So what happens in the story? It's gone forever. But how about this? You are a mathematician and you write down 2 + 2 = 4. You say, I discovered that 2 + 2 = 4, but you die and all your work dies with you. Would someone else in the future be able to determine that 2 + 2 = 4? Yes. This is the difference here between a belief in something versus actual scientific fact, is that a belief in something, if you don't pass it on, it goes away and it's gone. You can't recreate that. But if it's scientific fact and scientific data, and if it gets destroyed for some reason, like if this chemistry book that you guys have, this chemistry book talks about molecules and atoms and chemical reactions and the periodic table and radiation, all this stuff. if this 10 book got destroyed, does that mean that we'll never be able to find out about molecules in the periodic table ever again? No. It was discovered once. It can be discovered again. So I want to continue on. I saw a hand go up back there. What's up?
Oh yeah, you remember when Julius Caesar in Rome? Like
I've heard of it.
Didn't his library burn down or something?
He says that was Alexander. I'm not that much on European history. I don't know that much about it. So let me just try to sum this up here, guys. I know I'm talking at you. I don't want to talk. I want to talk with you, not at you, but let me just try to, because we need to move on. Let me try to sum this up in the best way. If you have a story that has no evidence, your story dies with you. If you write it down, great. You have a record of it. But what if your records are destroyed? They're gone. But when it comes to scientific data, science, like facts, if it gets destroyed, it can be replicated. Last example I'll try to give you. Let's say that somebody discovers that time is relative. And their work gets destroyed, the scientist dies, and there's no record of his work on time is relative. Could someone in the future also discover that time is relative? Yes. But if I tell her a story about my trip to Africa, and if I'm dead, she's dead, and she didn't write it down, my story's gone with me. You can't recreate that. Okay, let's get into it. So, where we are now in 2023, science is new. Science as we know it today did not exist until just a few hundred years ago. That is not a lot of time. I mean, the United States of America has been a country for just a few hundred years. I mean, let me try to see what the actual. Our country is 247 years old. Back then they were wearing wigs and riding horses and strollers, and if you wanted to shoot a gun, you had to shoot one shot, then you had to find another bullet, you had to stuff it in there, you had to get your gunpowder, pour it in there, and you had to stuff it all in. To reload a gun, it took a minute. Now we have something that's automatic. So long time. A lot can happen in just a few hundred years. If you look at, I want to give you guys a time scale. Let's say this is year zero. I'm not talking about the first, I'm talking about we have AD and we have BC. We live in AD. So right now it's, we go to 2000 AD. That was 23 years ago. And we'll just say right here, you are here. That's about 2023. Okay. Let's go back in time 4,000 years ago to about 2000 BC. You have nomadic humans wandering around. This is before the Greek philosophers, but you just got people in the Middle East. You got people in Asia. The wheel is barely even new. Very nomadic people. People riding horses, people riding donkeys, people riding camels. Really old stuff. Modern science, as we know it, we're talking about Galileo, Einstein, Oppenheimer. Why not? He's kind of new in pop culture these days. Isaac Newton. That's it. That's modern science. That means that everybody here whatever they were talking about, they didn't really have a lot of information to back it up. This is where the belief came in, because they didn't have any means to support it. Remember, these people didn't know what a germ was. These people didn't know where the sun went when it set. That's why they worshipped it every day, because they were so thankful it rose. The sun will rise until either the earth is destroyed or the sun is destroyed, whichever happens first. They didn't know why the moon was a crescent, and then it was full, and then it was gone. Why it rained, what brought the seasons. None of that was known. So you just have to, I don't want to say assume, but you just have to try to formulate your own conclusion. Back in these days, no one knew what an experiment was. No one knew what a, no, I keep writing what wrong. What a germ, an atom, which is our talk for today, stars, etc. were. They didn't know about the core of the earth like we do now. They didn't know about other planets like we do now. They didn't know about galaxies and other solar systems like we do now. Very primitive. The only real source of information and new information was curiosity. Why is this the way it is? Curiosity was the source of thought and speculation. Why is water wet? Why does it rain from the sky? Where does the sun go? Stuff like that. What is this weird growth on my back? They didn't know. And we're going back to ancient Greece. Many philosophers formulated explanations based on their own life experiences. Let me tell you the problem with this. If you try to base reality on your own life experiences, it's going to be pretty skewed because not everybody sees through your eyes. Right now, it is 11:36 a.m. in Tampa, Florida, USA, North America. Does that mean that it is 11:36 a.m. everywhere else in the world? Do you guys know how many time zones there are on Earth? I'll give you a hint. It's how we came to the number of hours there are in a day. Every time zone is a different hour. So how many time zones are there? 24. That's how we know. There's 24 hours. There's 24 time zones. It is currently, what time is it? Or it is 88 degrees here. Does that mean that it is 88 degrees everywhere? No, it's a sunny day today. No rain. Doesn't mean that's the same everywhere. If you're going to base reality just on your own experiences, it's going to be very skewed because not everybody has the same life you have. Not everybody lives where you live. Not everyone has the same routine and regimen as you do. But this is how they did it back then. Now, when it came to matter, like solid, liquid, gas, many philosophers, if you all haven't figured this out yet, today's basically a history lesson. Many philosophers concluded that matter was composed of things such as fire, water, air, and earth. These were considered like the four pillars of existence. In fact, there's two movies I can think of right at the top of my head that have to do with this. One of them just came out that Disney released. Say what? No, not Encanto. Come on. You'll know. You're just kidding, right? You're not being serious? When I show you the one, you're gonna go, oh. Hold on. Let me share my screen. Oh. Anybody see this movie?
I see them on my For You page all the time.
Oh yeah? What are the four elementals in this movie? They got fire people, water people, air people, and earth people. Exactly. There's a movie in the 90s called The Fifth Element.
What about Avatar? You know that TV show Nickelodeon?
I never watched Avatar. This movie came out in the 90s where The Fifth Element, where this woman is the fifth element, where these aliens are coming to destroy the earth and she's going to save everybody. So you had to get fire, water, air, and earth, and the four of them combined, and they kind of shoot into her, and she's the fifth element, and she repels the bad guys. Okay, but yeah, not Encanto. I'm talking about elementals. Those are first thought up of in ancient Greece. Fire, earth, air, water. Okay. Now, there's going to be three dead guys we're going to talk about, everybody. And the first one, or let's title this, the progression of the atom and atomic theory. Encanto. Okay, there's going to be three dead guys here we're going to highlight. The first one is Democritus. He's a Greek philosopher. So we're talking BC. I don't know exactly when he lived. I can probably look up in your book real quick. I think it's like 400 BC. Let me see. Let's see. Where are you, Democritus? Here we go. 460 BC to 370 BC. So he lived 90 years. It's not bad. Remember, when you're doing BC, you're counting down to zero. That's why it goes from 460 to 370. He lived a really long time for that age. Democritus, and I have a picture of him, or at least a sculpture of him. Here he is. He's kind of goofy looking. That's a statue of him, or a portrait of him. He's the first person to propose that matter was not infinitely divisible. What that means is that eventually you get down to a certain level of matter and you can't break it down any further. He first thought that up. You can't just keep breaking it down. Like in our national anthem, one nation, indivisible. You can't divide it. He figured that there comes a point where you cannot divide something. It gets down to its lowest level. Now, here's that word I was saying. He believed matter was made up of small particles called atomos. What do you think atomos means in English? Probably atoms. Now, did he have any evidence to support his claim? No, he didn't. There was no way he could have. And we're talking 400 BC, guys. There's hardly even clothes back then. They wore togas. He did not have a way to prove this scientifically. He just had a hunch. If you had a hunch, is that going to suffice for scientific fact? I have a hunch that Alex is a witch. That was actually justice in 1600 America in the colonies. Hey, you're a witch. What's your proof? I've got none. Okay, kill him. That was the justice system. Now we got to have a little thing called evidence. He had no evidence to support his claim. He just had a feeling. Democritus believed, there it is again, atoms could not be created, destroyed, or divided. He's partially correct. You may have heard of the first law of the conservation of matter. It states that matter cannot be created nor destroyed. It just gets reused. Technically speaking, in my jug of water here, one of these water molecules passed through a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Are there aliens delivering water to this planet on a daily basis? Of course not. All the water that is currently on Earth has been here since the very beginning of Earth, and it just gets recycled all over. So whenever you have a sip of water sometime today, odds are one molecule of water, one little H2O went through a T-Rex. It's not like that water left the planet. It's been here the whole time. Atoms just get reused. So he was partially correct in this thought. They cannot be created. They cannot be destroyed. They just get recycled. Now, I know you guys may not know a whole lot about chemistry yet, but you will. Is there anything smaller than an atom? Protons, neutrons, electrons. So he was wrong with the divided part. You can get smaller than an atom. He thought atom is as low as it goes. He wasn't right there. But hey, you got the conversation started. He also believed that there were different kinds of atoms. Again, you guys are noobs when it comes to chemistry. You'll become pros in a few months. See this thing behind me? We call it a periodic table. It identifies every element that we know of. Let me give you two examples. Hydrogen, oxygen. Those are two different elements. Think of the elements like Pokemon. Is Pikachu and Charmander the same thing? No, they're not. A hydrogen atom is different than an oxygen atom. They're both made of atoms, but there's different kinds of atoms, just like there's different kinds of Pokemon. Not one atom is the same as another when it comes to differing elements. And then finally, different atoms have different properties. All right. Again, I'm taking into consideration, you guys who know this, but you should know this, okay? There's a lightning storm. And I'm going to hide under a piece of sheet metal. You are going to hide under a rubber suit. Is sheet metal made up of the same elements as rubber? No. One of them attracts lightning. The other one is actually repellent of it. It's an insulator. All these elements have different properties. Think about it. You got copper, which is basically bronze. You got silver. You got gold. You got, where are you? Where? Titanium. You got platinum. Platinum somewhere on here. Anybody see platinum? There it is. You know, they say, oh, I have gold records. Well, let's say that I'm Taylor Swift. I have records that are gold records. I made so much money on my gold records. What level is considered higher than gold? Platinum. Exactly. So there's different elements and they have different qualities.
What about carbon?
That's carbon. Number 6. Carbon under a lot of pressure. Okay, now here's the problem with Democritus. Democritus was met with heavy criticism from other philosophers. You guys are very young and you haven't had a whole lot of life experiences, but here's something that I bet you will learn as you get older. When people are faced with new information that changes their world and changes their reality, they're typically going to respond to it in one of 3 ways. They either fear it, they either deny it, or they condemn it. Think of COVID. Worst pandemic, pan means worldwide. If you're wondering why they call it a pandemic means all worldwide. Worst pandemic in 100 years. Not a lot of humans that were alive in the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic were alive for COVID. Think of the 3 ways that people responded to it. Some people were afraid of it. Some people hated it. Some people feared it. Wait, no, denied it is what I meant to say. Some people feared it. Some people hated it. Some people denied it. That's how we respond to new information. Humans are notorious for that. So when Democritus is like, hey, there's these things called atoms, and they compose everything that we are. And there's different atoms for different elements, and they all have different properties. He was laughed at because that changed the way things would have been. That changed the world that people knew. And so they either criticized him for it, they denied him, or they feared him. And one of his major detractors was named Aristotle. Aristotle was like the coolest kid in school. Very influential. He was a big critic of Democritus. He was a very influential philosopher. He was like the coolest kid in the toga. Everybody listened to Aristotle. And if whatever Aristotle said, everybody basically followed him. So I bet you all are just wondering, well, why did he deny it? What evidence does Aristotle have to say Democritus is wrong? Again, there was not a whole lot of evidence back then for anything because science wasn't a thing. He didn't believe him. There's that word again. He didn't believe atoms could exist in empty space because Aristotle didn't believe that empty space existed. It's like me saying, I don't believe stars exist because I don't believe in space. How can you have stars if there is no space? That was Aristotle's argument. How can you have atoms in empty space? I don't believe in empty space. But again, this is all about belief. Just because you believe something doesn't mean it's right or wrong. You have no evidence. Belief is not a source of evidence. If I was on trial for breaking into your house and you put me on the stand with a jury of my peers and a judge, and they said, what is your evidence that Mr. Thorson broke into your house? And you just said, I just believe he did. Is that going to hold up in a court of law? No, you got to have evidence. Back then, this is all they've got. Now, because of all this, Democritus's claims on atoms was denied for nearly 2,000 years. So for a long time, atoms were never thought of because Mr. Aristotle, who's very influential, he's like an alpha male. What he says, everybody believes. It was denied. And by the way, where's Aristotle? Here he is. There's Aristotle. Not very nice. But then we get to about 2,000 years later, and here's our last dead guy, John Dalton. He proved, oh, by the way, he lived 1766 to 1844. So not terribly long ago. He proved Democritus to be mostly right. He was a school teacher. Now, what do you think John Dalton had during his time that Democritus and Aristotle didn't have? Not just microscopes. Back then, you didn't have microscopes that could see atoms. We're talking just, around Revolutionary War, pre-Civil War time in human history. He did have scientific instruments. He had something called the scientific method. He had the ability to do experiments. He had those resources that the Greeks never had. And with those resources, he proved mostly that Democritus was right. This later became known as Dalton's atomic theory. And there are several principles to it, everyone. This is where we'll start to wrap things up. John Dalton proved Democritus was mostly right. And here's what he was able to discover. Because, I'm going to make a note of this, Dalton had advancements in science. There's a reason why there were no spaceships in 1776 America, because they didn't have the advancements at that time. This is going to make me sound really old, but when I was in kindergarten or first grade, when we wanted to watch a movie, the teacher would literally take out a reel of film, put it into the film projector, and then play it like that. Now I've got this computer. I've got these projectors hooked up to the ceiling. You can watch a movie in HD. HD was not a thing when I was in high school. And I'm not that much older than you guys. So we have advancements all the time. And now we're getting in the world of AI. Wait, imagine what it's going to be like when you have kids in high school. It'd be blown away. So these advancements were happening, and Dalton had that to his advantage. Here's what he found out. Matter is composed of atoms. Atoms are indivisible. You can break them down like Varun said into protons, neutrons, electrons. Atoms of the same element are identical. I want you to put an asterisk next to this one. That is false. I'll tell you why on tomorrow. Atoms of one element differ from another element. Okay, we'll pause here.